everyone. It's great to see nearly 90 people on this call. We're 2.5 years into, nearly 2.5 years into grass sealing now. So we've been making really good progress. And what I want to share with you are some of our high-level findings. I'm going to whiz through some of the early slides because I just really added them for anybody who's new to the call. But I think for most people on the call, you're pretty familiar with what we're doing. So Blanca, if you'd move to the next slide, please. So this is our consortium. We're a multi-actor project and we have a participant action research approach. So we're very much working with our stakeholder organisations and our women in our living labs. And it's great to see some of them here at this meeting to figure out what's going on. And then we're working with policy stakeholders to figure out what's a viable policy option to move things forward. If you would move on to the next slide, Blanca, that's really telling you who our consortium are. We have some high-level European bodies involved, which we think will help us make policy recommendations. We're really pleased at the level of interest that DG Agri have taken in the project. We have 9 partners across Europe, all in very different rural and farming regions, and we're learning a lot from that. Blanca, you can go through the next slide. The next one, these are our expected outcomes. What the European Union is hoping these projects will do is provide ideas on how to transform gender norms and stereotypes and lead to better policies and tools. Blanca, if you could move on to the next slide on what we're doing. So this is what we've been doing. We've been identifying data gaps. We've gathered data from men and women entrepreneurs. We've benchmarked policy documents to see how effectively they take account of gender or whether they're actually sidelining gender in the documents. We have these policy forums. And we have living labs where we're working with 8 women innovators in 9 locations across Europe. Our living labs have worked extremely well. We have paid our stakeholder organisation that co-lead those with us and our women innovators who participate. So to the next slide, please, Blanca, some key findings. I will go through these quite quickly and then hopefully we can come back to them in the discussion. We can see there's different gender regimes across Europe, which have real implications for men and women's ability to work and to innovate. So in Sweden, we see that the extremely well-developed parental leave system means that parental leave is understood as the responsibility of men and women. And that is quite different to other countries participating. So if you look at Ireland or Scotland, there's a very short maternity leave and it's called maternity leave. So the assumption is that it's women's responsibility and the amount of paternity leave for fathers is very low. So we see this kind of thing happening at a range of levels. We have benchmarked policy documents. Charlene will talk more about this. But we often find that there's a mention to women, it's tick boxed, women are left in the corner and the mainstream business of farming or rural continues. Blanca, if you would go to the next slide. So what have we learned? Women have a different approach to innovation. The scale is different. And that's true for both men and women in rural and remote rural areas. There's often an ecological focus to innovations. Women are interested in maintaining heritage and culture and using local resources, whether it's materials, wool, and so on. And one of the other things we're seeing is that because men tend to inherit the farm intergenerationally, it's almost like they also inherit a way of farming that might have been right 200 years ago, but not necessarily today. And what we find is that women who come into agriculture are not constrained by those cultural norms. They're able to look at the business differently. They tend to have a much more farm to fork approach and think about diversifying the business. We've also found that women really benefit from mentors and networks. And this is important because sometimes they don't participate so much in mainstream agricultural organizations, so they can miss out on those mentors and networks. Blanca, if you'd move to the next slide on access to land. We know this isn't new. Women rarely inherit land. Where they do, like in Lithuania, holdings tend not to be commercial. And this is something that will need to be addressed going forward, because women are farming in a way we want the industry to go. So how access to land happens is something I think that's going to need a lot more thought. To the next slide on support for entrepreneurs, please, Blanca. Women have different scales of enterprises, and how success is judged, again, needs to be revisited. We need to make sure that women can access microfinance. And we also need to recognise the importance of small enterprises for rural areas, whether it's generating self-employment or employment for one other person. In rural places, this is really significant. To the next slide, Blanca, on women and community infrastructure. We're finding that in a lot of remote parts of Europe, there's often no community infrastructure, and women are starting cafes, sometimes creches, libraries, activities for older people. And it's almost as if they're taking on the mantle of providing the community infrastructure for everybody who lives there. And we need to really think about this, because the market will never be able to provide those types of measures in these very remote areas with low demography. So we need to think about how we reward the people who are providing that infrastructure to make the community remote places people want to live. So the next slide, Blanca. So going forward, I think we need to do some work with banks and finances to make sure they understand the scale of support women need. We need to make sure women are better represented in mainstream organisations like Copa Cogeca, who are shaping agriculture and rural policy. And we need to ensure that women's initiatives aren't just sidelined on the corner. We need to make sure that they are part of the mainstream. The next slide, please, Blanca. We have seen good progress with the inclusion of measures for women in the national CAP plans, and we've benchmarked these documents to see how effectively they are taking account of women. But again, I'll leave that to Charlene to say a little bit more about. We saw in the strategic dialogue on agriculture that there's a call to look at legal frameworks and how they impact women's ability to inherit land across Europe. Grass Ceiling has done this. We have looked at the three main legal frameworks that govern land transfer. And while in theory, none of them discriminate against women, the different frameworks have limited impact on women's access to land. I think we will need to think really seriously about gender budgeting going forward. Gender budgeting is the most effective way to ensure that policies are having an equal impact on men and women, and it's something we need to look at. Okay, I'm on to my second last slide, I think. My last slide, going forward. So I think we have quite a few soft laws. So gender mainstreaming, I would see, is a soft law. They're kind of suggestions, but not enforced. So we saw equal pay was a hard law and it had real impact. If we look at, for example, the CAP national plans and taking account of gender, there's no penalty if nation states don't do this, and some of them have not done it. The gender equality strategy is laudable, but it's aspirational. You know, it calls for more childcare in rural areas, but how is that going to happen? So I think we need to, if we're serious about trying to achieve gender equality, then I think, these soft nudging measures need to have more teeth. We need to ensure there's equal representation of women in farming organisations, and that can be imposed. We need a stronger parental leave directive. The vision for agriculture is to be welcomed, but I'm a little concerned that the attention on women might be sidelined to the Women in Farming platform. I would like to see it much more front and centre. And, it would be really good if the platform on farming took account of the findings of our three sister projects working in this space. Okay, that and my final slide says thank you. And thank you, Blanca.